He tightened the reins, eyes squinting. The scream was not like a normal human voice. It was hoarse, desperate, and mixed with the ferocious roar of a wild beast. Elias snapped the reins and drove the horse into the rocky crevice. The sight that met his eyes made his jaw clench. A frail old Apache man was being attacked by a massive gray wolf. A broken bow lay flung to the side, and blood was soaking into the sand. Without thinking, Elias yanked his Winchester from the leather holster. A sharp, thunderous shot rang out. The wolf was hit but not down. It lunged toward the old man. Elias fired a second shot, then leapt from his horse and unleashed a third at close range. The wolf let out a chilling howl and collapsed. Elias dropped to his knees beside the old man and rolled him onto his side. He was still breathing, though blood was pouring down his arm. "Can you hear me?" Elias asked, his voice low and steady. The old eyes opened, deep and bright like glowing embers. He gave a slight nod. "It is over. The wolf is dead." Elias helped him to his feet and tied a makeshift bandage around the wound with a rope. As the two rode out of the canyon, the sunset turned the sky a burning red. Elias had no way of knowing that saving this man's life would change his own forever and lead to the arrival of a woman who would bring warmth back to his once lonely ranch. 3 days after the bear incident, under a blood-red evening sky, Elias was staking the fence when the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. He braced an arm on the post and squinted. A lone rider appeared on the dusty red road. It was the old Apache man from before. Toka dismounted slowly. His arm was now bandaged with animal hide, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a tall Apache woman, her muscles clearly defined beneath her sun-darkened skin. Her thick black hair was half-braided, hanging over her shoulder. Slung across that shoulder was an old spear, like a symbol that she had once been a warrior. Elias set the hammer down and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You recovered fast." Toka nodded. "Because of you, I am still alive. According to our laws, a life for a life. Sana will stay here and help you until the debt is paid." Elias frowned, glancing at the woman. She stood still, arms crossed, her deep black eyes gleaming. There was no fear, no pleading. She looked more like a stone statue than someone being sent to repay a favor. "I do not need anyone to settle a debt," Elias said slowly. "That is not your choice," Toka replied firmly. "From now on, she belongs to this place until she chooses to leave." They exchanged a long look, as if two worlds were sizing each other up. Finally, Elias gave a small nod. "All right, but there are no chains here. She is free to work, or not." Toka seemed satisfied. He climbed back onto his horse. "Then it is done." He turned and rode off, leaving Sana standing alone in the red-dusted yard. Elias pointed toward the water trough. "There is water there. If you want to wash, the well is over there. The horse stall is empty. You can sleep there for now." Sana said nothing, just gave a small nod. Her steps were heavy but steady, and her tall frame cast a long shadow across the yard as the sun went down. That night, Elias sat alone on the porch, the Winchester laid across his lap. In the darkness, he saw Sana sitting with her back against the barn wall, eyes open, staring up at the star-filled sky. She did not sleep, like a wild animal still unsure if this place was safe. Elias poured a bit of whiskey into a tin cup and took a sip. "Well, Holt," he muttered, "this ranch has never had anyone else. And now, there is an Apache warrior woman in the yard." A night wind blew through, carrying the scent of dry grass. Elias felt something had shifted, a new kind of silence. Not empty, but heavy, as if waiting for something to begin. In the first few days, Sana barely stepped inside the cabin. She slept out by the horse stall, her back against the wall, eyes always half open through the night like a watchful sentinel. Elias kept leaving a portion of food on the wooden chair near the door, saying little. Each morning, he would find the empty bowl neatly placed back, a silent acknowledgement. On the third afternoon, as Elias herded the cattle back into the corral, he noticed the hay had been cleaned up. The stable looked tidier than usual, with the straw gathered into small piles. He stood there for a long while, leaning on the fence, watching Sana kneeling by the trough, her sun-darkened hands scooping water for the horses. "You don't have to do that," Elias called out, not too loudly. She looked up, her dark eyes flashing with a hint of defiance. Then she stood, brushed the dust off her leather dress, and continued working. as if his words were not worth answering. That evening, Elias set a pot of beans to cook on the porch. As Sana walked by, he nodded toward the wooden chair. "Sit. Eat with me." She stood still for a moment, then slowly took a seat. They ate in silence. Only the clinking of spoons against the bowls and the soft crackling of the fire broke the stillness. The next day, strong winds swept through, knocking down a section of the northern fence. Elias braced himself to replant the posts, but the rope was drawn too tight. It slipped from his grip and tore the skin on his palm open. Sana was carrying a bundle of straw when she saw the blood. Without a word, she dropped the bundle, walked over, tore a strip from the hem of her dress, and wrapped it tightly around his hand to stop the bleeding. Her hands were strong and rough, but her movements were unexpectedly gentle. Their eyes met. No thank you. No smile. Just a quiet nod. But to Elias, that moment meant more than any long conversation ever could. That night, Sana did not return to the horse stall. Instead, she sat near the porch, a few steps away from Elias, looking out over the open fields. As darkness fell, their shadows stretched side by side across the ground. "Tomorrow," Elias said, his eyes on the horizon, "we need to replace more fence posts. I'll need someone to hold the rope." Sana glanced at him and gave a small nod. For the first time, Elias felt the ranch was no longer completely empty. There were footsteps besides the sound of his own boots. And strangely, that made the desert night feel just a little less heavy. That afternoon, dark clouds loomed overhead. Elias and Sana had just finished mending the last stretch of fence before the storm rolled in. Both were drenched in sweat, their clothes coated with dust. "All done," Elias said, leaning against a fence post. Sana nodded and walked back toward the cabin, using a stick for support. As the rain began to fall, Elias lit the fire. Sana stood at the doorway, soaking wet, her broad shoulders and thick hair hanging down like a black waterfall. "Come in, or you'll catch cold," Elias said. She stepped inside and stood still in front of the fire until the warmth began to seep into her. Elias poured whiskey into 2 tin cups and slid one toward her. Sana glanced at it, then took a small sip. After a while, Elias spoke, his voice slow and steady. "I used to have a wife. She died of fever 3 years ago. Since then, it's just been me and the cattle." Sana did not turn to look at him, but her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "People told me to sell the land and leave, but I could not. I buried her here. And this is all I have left." Elias stared into the fire, his voice sinking lower. Silence lingered. Finally, Sana set the cup down and moved a little closer to the fire. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse, as if pulled from somewhere deep inside. "They called me bad luck. A man in my tribe hurt me when I was too young. Instead of punishing him, they cast me out. Said I had tainted the people." For the first time, Elias saw a real crack in her eyes. No longer just guarded. It was raw pain. He nodded slowly. "They were wrong." Sana turned to him, her dark eyes flickering, searching to see if he meant it. "Here," Elias said firmly. "No one sends you away. Not unless you want to leave." The room went quiet. Only the sound of rain tapping on the wooden roof filled the space. Sana turned back toward the fire, sitting still, but her shoulders eased, like she had finally set down a heavy stone. That night, she slept inside the cabin. She did not return to the horse stall. Elias lay on the long bench, listening to the sound of her breathing settle into the dark. For the first time in many years, the cabin no longer felt like a graveyard of the past. It was slowly becoming a home that was alive. "I am deeply grateful for your presence here. And if this story brought back something familiar, those dusty red afternoons, the echo of hooves beating in your chest, then subscribe to my channel. So every day, we can sit together. And I'll tell you another tale from the West." That afternoon, the rain came without warning. The wind blew hard enough to tilt the fence, and the smell of wet earth hung thick in the air. Elias had just managed to herd the cattle into the barn when night fell. He stepped into the cabin, his shirt soaked through with rain. Sana came in shortly after, her leather pants clinging to her muscular legs, her black hair heavy with water. "Sit down," Elias said, motioning toward the fire. Sana sat near the hearth, her broad shoulders trembling slightly. Elias threw more wood into the stove, and the flames rose, casting golden light that danced across her sun-darkened skin. For a long time, the only sound was the rain drumming on the roof. Then Elias grabbed an old towel and stepped over. "Give me that," he said. Sana frowned, but let him dry her hair. His movements were slow and careful, as if afraid he might hurt her. The scent of smoke, rain, and sweat hung in the air. Heavy like a confession, neither of them could put into words. As Elias turned to hang the towel, Sana's eyes caught a small photo frame on the shelf, a faded portrait of a blonde woman. She stood, leaned on her cane, and gently brushed the dust from the glass. "Your wife?" she asked softly. Elias turned, and his gaze dropped. "Yeah. She's been gone 3 years." The cabin's air grew thick. Sana set the frame down and turned to face him, her dark eyes deep and searching, as if trying to see through the man in front of her. "And now you let me stay here. Do you regret it?" Elias stepped closer, now standing right in front of her. "No. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you stay..." He paused for a breath. This place will be more than just a ranch. Only a breath separated them now. Sana held his gaze, her lips trembling slightly. And then, as if something inside him could no longer wait, Elias reached out and touched her face, his calloused hand brushing against her strong cheek. The kiss came slow, deep, and heavy, a promise unspoken, that neither of them would be alone anymore. The sound of the rain faded into the distance, leaving only the beating of hearts and the crackling of fire inside the cabin. When they pulled apart, Elias gave a small nod and stepped back. "We've got work tomorrow. Get some rest." Sana said nothing, just pulled a blanket around her shoulders and sat closer to the fire for a while longer. On her lips, a faint smile appeared, the first since she had set foot on the ranch. That night, Elias lay on the long bench, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling. The cabin was no longer quiet the way it used to be. Something new was taking root in the air, something strong and irreversible. The next morning, the air was thick with dust. Elias was carving fence posts when the sound of hooves echoed through the valley. He looked up, eyes narrowing. A group of Apache warriors rode toward him. 6 men, their faces painted red, feathers swaying in the wind. Sana heard the horses and stepped out of the cabin, still gripping her cane. The wind blew her thick black hair back, her muscular shoulders tensing. The man in front shouted something in Apache, then switched to clipped English. "You there, the debt is paid. She comes back to the tribe. Give her back." Elias set down his hammer and walked to the porch. "She has her own legs. She chooses whether to stay or leave. I do not sell people, and I do not keep them either." Sana stepped forward and stood beside him. All eyes turned to her, waiting. A wave of hot wind swept through. Sana tightened her grip on the cane and took a deep breath. "I am not going back," she said firmly. The men on horseback muttered among themselves. One growled, "If you stay, they will call you a traitor. The word will spread across the tribes." Sana stood tall. "They cast me out once. Now I choose this place. Here, I am no longer afraid." Elias glanced at her, his gray eyes flashing with quiet pride. He turned to the warriors. "You heard her. Now ride on, before I change my mind." The air was thick and tense. Then the leader yanked the reins and turned his horse. "Remember what you said today. When the council hears of this, there will be consequences." They rode off in a cloud of red dust. Sana let out a heavy breath, sweat beading on her skin despite the dry heat. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tightness in her muscles. "You sure?" She turned to him, her dark eyes burning with resolve. "I choose this, and if they come back, I still will not go." Elias nodded. "Then from now on, you are not someone repaying a debt. You are part of this home." They stood in silence for a moment, then walked back into the cabin together. That night, Elias cleaned his Winchester, packing more bullets into the crate. Sana sharpened an old blade. Neither spoke it aloud, but both knew. The real storm was still ahead. 3 days later, Elias saddled the horse and put on his old wool coat. "Come with me to town," he said. Sana frowned, standing in the doorway with her cane pressed to the ground. "What for?" "So people know you're not just a ghost living out here," Elias replied, his eyes serious. They rode side by side to Broken Mesa, a dusty little town where rumors traveled faster than the wind. When Elias stepped into the general store, the room fell silent. A few cowboys froze, their eyes scanning Sana from head to toe. Broad shoulders, powerful arms, black eyes sharp as a blade. The shopkeeper cleared her throat, reluctantly. "Afternoon, Mr. Holt, and your companion." Elias gave a small nod. This is Sana. She lives with me. From now on, if anyone has a problem with her, they've got a problem with me first. A scoffing laugh rang out from the corner. A drunken man, hat pulled low, stumbled to his feet. A white man bringing that home, he sneered, pointing at Sana. The air turned to ice. Sana stood tall, her face cold as stone. But Elias stepped forward, grabbed the man by the collar. Shut your mouth. The drunk spat on the floor. Or what? Elias's punch landed like lightning. The man crumpled to the ground, teeth scattering across the floor. The whole store fell dead silent. Elias stood over him, eyes scanning the room. Anyone else got something to say? No one answered. Sana remained still, shoulders squared. In her eyes, there was something that was not fear. Maybe, for the first time, it was the feeling of being protected. As they stepped outside, Toka was there, leaning on his cane. He looked at Elias, then at Sana, and gave a rare smile. She is free now. The tribe holds no claim on her. Sana looked up at him, then exhaled as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. Then I am staying. I owe nothing to anyone anymore. Elias climbed onto his horse and extended a hand. Sana placed her large, calloused palm into his. Steady, but gentle. On the ride back, the wind kicked up the dust again, but it no longer felt heavy. Elias glanced at the woman riding beside him. For the first time, he did not see a stranger on his land. He saw a true companion. Spring came late, but the grasslands finally turned a soft, fresh green. Elias built new fence lines, while Sana planted a small vegetable garden behind the cabin. The sound of hammering echoed all day. But this time it was not just one man. Every strike came from two hands working together, two shadows moving side by side beneath the sunday. One morning, as Elias was heading out to the cattle barn, Sana stepped forward, her hand resting on her belly. I think there's a child. Elias froze for a moment, then nodded. Then we'll need another room. The very next day, they began building a new wooden wall. Sana carried the heavy beams without complaint, her skin shining with sweat under the sunday. Elias sawed the planks, drove in every nail with care. That evening, they sat on the porch, drinking water from a tin flask. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the scent of damp earth and new grass. Elias looked toward the nearly finished room and smiled gently. There'll be a window here, facing the pasture, so the child can wake to the first light of morning. Sana tilted her head slightly, a rare but warm smile curling at the corner of her lips. On the last cattle drive of the season, the two of them rode together, guiding the herd home. The sunset painted the fields in deep reds, dust rising behind the thundering hooves. Once the cattle were corralled, Elias stepped up to the porch and stood tall. Sana walked over and leaned her shoulder into him. In silence, they watched the sun slip behind the mountains. Elias placed his hand over hers, resting on her belly. This ranch used to be where I buried my past. Now it's where our future begins. Sana turned to him, her dark eyes glistening in the evening light. Because it's the place I chose to stay. Elias nodded, saying nothing more. They stood there as the sky faded to purple, with only the warm glow from the cabin casting long shadows of two people on the ground. For the first time, Elias no longer heard the emptiness of the desert wind, only the slow, steady breathing of a home that had finally come alive. My friends, love is not about possession. It is about release. Someone who truly loves will forgive the past, accept every scar, and choose to stay when every other reason is gone. That kind of love turns loneliness into a home. It turns two broken people into a family. And in the end, my deepest wish is that you find happiness and peace. Always. I love all of you, the dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what this story meant to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Type 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe for more dramatic tales from the Wild West.